Hello, my name is Matthew Hilton. I'm the CEO of the Advocacy People. Welcome to this short video when we're going to explain how advocacy can help young people as they transition from children's social care to adult services. We hope that by the end of this webinar, you'll know who we are and what advocacy is, understand some of the different types of advocacy, and understand how advocacy can support young people who are transitioning and support you in your work. Before we get into the main presentation, I just want to say a little bit about us and about advocacy. We are, as I say, the Advocacy People. We were previously called SEAP, and we're an independent charity operating across England. We provide free and independent advocacy services. We deliver several different strands of advocacy, and today we're going to focus on two of these: independent advocacy for children and young people, and Independent Care Act advocacy. But you can find more about our other services on our website. If we're not the provider of these types of advocacy in your area, someone else will be. And it might be that there are different providers for the two services that we're going to be talking about today. Advocacy itself can be hard to understand, and I know it's often confused with the same legal term. But put simply, our advocates provide an independent voice for the person, the client, obtaining and passing on the client's views when decisions are being made about them. We make sure that their rights are being upheld and that proper processes are being followed, particularly when the person lacks capacity or confidence to speak up for themselves. We all know, I think, how hard it can be when we don't feel listened to, when what's important to us isn't taken seriously by others, or when we just don't have the words to say what we really feel or want. And it can be even more difficult when decisions are being made about our health and social welfare. And of course, many of the people you're working with probably don't have the capacity to engage fully in the decision-making process. So by engaging with the person, with the client, as far as possible, and speaking to the people around them as appropriate, we try to build up a picture of the person's needs, wishes, and views, and communicate those to the decision makers. What I think sets us apart from other people involved in health and social care is our independence. We don't make decisions. We aren't emotionally involved. We don't deliver care. And all this means that we can remain objective and person-centered. We have no vested interest other than to ensure that the person's voice is heard and their rights are upheld within the relevant frameworks. So the advocate doesn't have to agree with their client. It is the client's view that needs to be heard, not the advocate's. In this session, we'll be focusing on children and young people's advocacy and Independent Care Act advocacy under the 2014 Care Act. First, we look at what young people are entitled to under the legislation, and then we move on to explore what an advocate does. I'd now like to introduce our two presenters today. First, Claire Palmer, a supervising advocate, mainly focusing on children and young people's advocacy.
Hello.
Hi, Claire. And also Louise Harris, who is our Wiltshire team manager.
Hello.
Hi, Louise. Both my colleagues are here to share their expertise with you so that you can understand how advocacy can help. First, then, over to Louise, who is going to explain a bit more about why we're doing this session and what we hope to achieve.
Thanks, Matthew. The idea for this session came from discussions about the development of our all-age advocacy service in Wiltshire, which started in July 2020. Prior to that, the Children's Advocacy Service and the Adult Advocacy Service were separate, and this is still the case in many areas. Our discussions covered transition for young people and the benefits of a joined-up service. This webinar is an opportunity to explore what's available and how it works in practice.
Thanks, Louise. I think it's worth noting at this point that at the time of recording anyway, COVID-19 public health restrictions are still in place, and therefore we are completely working the way we normally would, visiting all our clients at home or school or where they live. But that does not mean to say at all, does it, Louise, that the need for advocacy has in any way diminished, and we're certainly doing all we can to continue to advocate for people.
Absolutely. Since the start of the COVID-19 pandemic, as an organisation, we have continued to offer all types of advocacy. We are contacting clients by phones and video calls, and there's always a way that we can connect with clients and ensure their voices are heard. We are seeing some children in school if it's deemed unsafe or unsuitable for the children to be in their home for advocacy, but we have found some clients actually prefer video calls.
Thank you. Now over to Claire.
It's important that transition from being a child to being an adult is viewed as a journey by the professionals responsible for supporting and making decisions. It does not happen as an event on their 18th birthday. Young people can start the transition process from 14, and according to their needs, this journey may not finish until they are 25. Transition can be a difficult time as the rules and expectations change, as do services and legal frameworks. Different pieces of legislation are also effective from different ages. The advocacy people in Wiltshire can advocate for a client throughout their transition. This enables the advocate to come alongside the young person throughout their journey. However, sometimes there is one advocacy provider who delivers advocacy for children and young people, and another who works with adults. Where this is the case, we will always work alongside the other provider to ensure a smooth transition of advocate as well as social care team. We will start by briefly looking at which young people might be eligible for advocacy support during transition and the legislation surrounding this. Young people entitled to advocacy are those who are on a child protection plan, looked after by the local authority, care leavers, or have special educational needs and disabilities, including mental health difficulties. Such entitlement to advocacy falls under the Children's Act 1989 and the Adoption and Children's Act 2002. A young person's 18th birthday does not automatically mean that they no longer have care and support needs, but we know that people and legislation supporting and protecting them may change. And these young people are often in complex situations, so it's important that planning starts as early as possible, ideally from the young person's 14th birthday. Some young people, mostly those with educational needs and disabilities and care leavers, will receive support from children's services until the age of 25. In some areas, there are social work transition teams who pick up young people in this 14 to 25 transition age group. However, neither of these negate the need for advocacy, and those young people shouldn't be overlooked when considering the legislative requirements to instruct an advocate. Anyone can make a referral to children and young people's advocacy, including the young people themselves. The consent of the child is needed if they are able to consent. Consent for those that hold parental responsibility is also needed, unless the child is at the age and understanding to consent for it themselves. In addition to these requirements, under the law related to children and young people in transition also become entitled to advocacy under three key pieces of adult legislation, namely the Care Act 2014, Mental Health Act 1983, and Mental Capacity Act 2005. We'll look in more detail at independent advocacy under the Care Act in a moment, but just to note here, some young people might be under a section under the Mental Health Act and therefore be entitled to an independent mental health advocate. And for those whose living arrangements may be changing or they are undergoing serious medical treatment, they may be entitled to independent mental capacity advocate. All the information about the different entitlements can be found on our website, noting that if we don't provide these services in a particular area, then someone else will.
Thank you, Claire. So just to be clear there, What we've now done is looked at the different categories of young people who might be eligible for an advocate during transition, and you've briefly looked at the rather complex legislation surrounding all this.
Yes, that's right. It is important that referrers know who might be eligible for what, as some young people do not get the advocacy they're entitled to, and therefore the support they need. If in doubt, please ask us. We'd much rather referrers err on the side of caution and check out entitlement rather than not even consider advocacy.
Okay, so we've touched on the fact that as part of the transition process, some young people may be entitled to the support of an Independent Care Act advocate. I think Louise is now going to talk about how this works.
Thanks, Matthew. The Care Act provides advocacy for young people in transition, young carers, and more widely, those over 18 going through any of these adult social care processes. Adult needs assessments, preparation of care and support plans, review of care and support plans, safeguarding alerts. The first of the eligibility criteria for Independent Care Act advocacy is that the person has substantial difficulty in being involved with the process. There is no set assessment for this. It falls to the social worker or care manager to make this judgment. The person need only to be considered to have substantial difficulty in one of these areas: understanding relevant information, using or weighing up information, communicating wishes and feelings, and retaining information. Secondly, the person does not have anyone appropriate or able to support them. It's important to note that a paid carer cannot advocate for them.
So there are a lot of points there at which consideration must be given to instructing an advocate to support the young person. So let me ask next, what does this actually mean in practice? How will the advocate support the young person?
Our advocate will meet with the young person in private at a time and in a place that suits them. It might be that they need to meet them for a few shorter meetings rather than one or two longer ones, and they will adapt their communications according to the needs of the young person. It's about the young person's rights being upheld, their voice being heard, and them receiving the services they are entitled to. What's needed is clarity of purpose and ensuring that the correct people are involved at the correct time, i.e. referring at the appropriate time and not making transition a last minute thing when the young person is 17 and a half. It needs careful planning to ensure that the young person does not fall through the cracks. It also has to take account of the fact that a young person may not meet the criteria for adult services and how to prepare the young person for this outcome. To give you some examples, a young person who was a looked after child with SEND wished to live independently when she became a care leaver from the age of 18. However, she would not be able to live without support. The advocate, who had been involved since the age of 16 and ensured a package of support was put in place under the Care Act. There were multiple professionals involved, and the advocate ensured that the appropriate professionals were there for her at the appropriate time. The advocate ensured that the young person understood the choices available and that her voice was heard. Another example was where a care leaver became pregnant and again needed support to live independently. A care assessment was undertaken and the advocate ensured that the assessment included parent enablement. The transition for this young person was both to live independently and to become a parent too.
Thank you. Well, I think we now understand that. It's pretty clear that this can be complex and the advocate can be key in these situations.
Yes, that's right. With the complex processes and different professionals involved with young people who have care and support needs, we take a key role at being independent from any decision making. We focus entirely on the person's needs, wishes, and views, ensuring they are taken into account and that their rights are upheld when decisions are being made about their care and treatment. And if they're not, we will support the person to take action to challenge decisions made about them.
I suppose that if I were a social worker, I might wonder at this point why an advocate is needed if I have the interests of my client already at heart.
Of course, we know that all professionals working with young people have an element of advocacy within their day-to-day practice. However, the absolute key to how we work differently is our independence. We are not the budget holder or the provider of care and so on, and we are entirely client-led, which means that we never make judgments or assumptions, and people are free to make unwise decisions. We are there to pass on their views and wishes, which we will always do. Here's an example which, although not a transition case, does demonstrate the importance of advocacy. A care review was undertaken for a Lady C who lived in a residential home for 3 years since she had left residential school at the age of 19. The staff from the home reported that C wanted to move, but they thought if she did, then she would regret it. The status quo was maintained until the social work manager picked up on the case and decided that a review needed to be redone with the involvement of the advocate. To cut a long story short, the advocate worked with C to determine how she wanted to live her life and where. A process ensued whereby, with the use of photos and then a couple of visits, C was able to articulate what she wanted. C has now moved and settled into her new home, where she is much more active in all aspects of her life. In addition, all the professionals involved became more aware of the need for person-centered planning and the right to advocacy. Advocacy can ensure the right decisions are made first time round, that they are person-centered and in line with current legislation. As we have seen here, had the advocate been involved at the appropriate time, it would have been beneficial for all. In short, it's good practice, and good practice means good outcomes for people.
Thank you. A final question then from me. How can someone actually make a referral to Care Act advocacy?
Unlike children and young people's advocacy, most Care Act advocacy referrals have to be made by the social worker. So if you're another professional, such as a SENCO in a school, and think that someone is eligible for Care Act advocacy, you will need to speak to the social worker. However, we're always very happy to discuss possible referrals and advise whether or not we believe someone is eligible. To make a referral, please contact our Central Contact Centre. The details are shown on this slide. If we are not the right provider in your area and you can't find who is, do get in touch and we should be able to point you in the right direction.
Great. Well, thank you. Thank you to Louise and Claire for presenting today, and thank you to everyone who's been listening. I hope that the information provided helps you to understand how advocacy can support young people in transition, and I hope you've enjoyed listening to what we've had to say. If you need any more information or you wish to discuss a potential referral, please do get in touch. Thanks very much.